Where does money come from, and where does it go? Let's enter the buzzsaw.
Central Intelligence Agency.
It was described by witnesses as
Palsvig has worked as a proprietary trader for banks like Barclays in London, and he's also been the director of Morgan Stanley. He has now come out as a whistleblower against the nature of our monopoly, privately controlled central banking system. So he'll be joining me today to talk about it. Mas, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Let's start with this question of where you started to wake up to the nature of how central banking works, and what does it mean that basically we have these privately controlled central banks that are creating the money that we use?
Well, I mean, first time I actually had a kind of a hunch was as a trader, because my job was to make money as a trader. I would be buying and selling mainly government bonds and derivatives of various fixed income instruments. And I thought, you know, sometimes the monetary policy that was pursued by the central banks were counter to what I would have done if my job was to ensure a stable economic growth in the society. Then sometimes I might have, you know, taken a little bit of the foot off the what do you call it, speedometer, or what do you call it, the foot off the throttle, the pedal, yeah. And other times I might have done more to help smooth the economic transition method with the monetary policy instruments such as interest rates, for example, and money supply. And quite soon I was realizing that, you know, if I want to make money, I have to do the opposite of what I would have done if I was a central bank governor. In the end, I was kind of thinking that their job was to create as big economic booms as possible, and for as long as possible, like we saw during the zeros from 2000 to 2008, where the market went, where the real estate market went up and interest rates went down and equity markets went up and so on, and we had a huge growth in the economy. And other times, you know, it seemed to me that the busts were so severe and to the detriment of the people. You know, it was not necessarily worldwide at the same time all the time, but sometimes it was more on a country-specific situation. And I saw this. The central banks were, of course, both on a country-specific situation, but also globally. And then I saw on specific cases when IMF went into a country, every single time the same pattern happened. The IMF told the country to cut staff in the public sector, so that would obviously create huge unemployment, and then obviously you know, the public sector would demand less products from the private sector, so the private sector would lay off people as well. You would have deflation, you would have the equity market collapsing, you would have the real estate market collapsing, more unemployed people, and then in the end, the tax receipts will be so small that they, of course, couldn't pay the interest, or not even to talk about paying off the debt. And then coincidence happened every single time. Big multinational corporations would come in and buy the best, you know, golden eggs from each of these countries. So, such as, you know, maybe mineral wealth, or, you know, it could be, you know, huge privatizations of public corporations, public entities, and it happens country after country. So I actually started years ago asking central bank governors when I met them. I had a chance to meet them very often because I had there was a lady who was advising Credit Suisse First Boston in London in the 90s. And she introduced me to several central bank governors. Her name was Hannah Scobie, and so I had a chance to ask these people a lot of questions. So that's kind of, I was always kind of, what's going on? And then a year ago, I met some very smart people, and they told me about how money is created as debt. and I couldn't believe it. I had I woke up several times and had to read it again. But money is created as debt. We all think that money are created in the central bank. Of course, the notes and the coins are easy, but then even the digital money, we all believe that then our national bank will be creating it, and then it turns out that our national bank is not even a national bank. We have a central bank, and we call it Denmark's national bank. It's not a national bank, and neither is it Denmark's. It's owned by a trust, and nobody knows who the real beneficiaries are of this trust. It may be foreigners, and then it's a central bank, and it's not a national bank. So it's a lot of smoke and mirrors, and just like your Federal Reserve is not federal, it's also privately owned. And these things were new to me a year ago, and it's shocking. It's just shocking, and also to a lot of my friends and family and other people here in Denmark.
Well, Mads, what you're saying sounds a bit like what John Perkins described in his Confessions of an Economic Hitman, where he talked about how his job was to help countries, third world countries particularly, get into debt such that they had to basically mortgage their mines or their oil resources, or you name it, whatever they could get, whatever power the Western banks could get hold of. Ultimately, that was the goal of this whole concept, this whole process of debt.
Yeah. I see that. I saw that happening from the banking perspective. We could see that happening several times in different countries. For example, the most stellar case that really infuriated me was Greece in 2008, when you had the crisis in Greece. And I remember I stood at the trading floor at Danske Bank, and in 2008, and I said, now, when it was just informed, they just came out and saying IMF is going into Greece, and I just stood up in the morning meeting and said in front of the whole trading floor that now what's going to happen is, and I repeated, the story about, unemployment, firing everybody in the public sector, deep recession, equity market collapse, real estate market collapse, and then Greece being forced to sell out of their prime assets. And that was exactly what happened. I mean, obviously, you could hear a pin drop. Nobody said a word after. When I said this, I realized, okay, that was maybe not so good to say, but I just think that's not why I became a banker. I did not become a banker I don't mind making money. I like to make money, but not when it means that other people have to suffer that much. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, a low-paid Greek worker would be paid 1,000 euro a month in 2008, and now they're making 150 euros a month. So they have had to take a hit of 85% in their wages. It's just insane. I mean, I wouldn't. If anybody told me that was possible in Europe, that the poorest could suffer 85% pay cut, I would have said impossible. And now here it has happened, and they were so let down by the Tsipras and the Syriza. They have the political party that won the election, allegedly supposed to kind of help help stabilize the economy and help the poorest people in Greece. And there was a referendum last summer where the EU wanted them to suffer even more economic cutbacks. And Syriza, the government in Greece, they said we'll put it out for a referendum. And the people said, no, we don't want that agreement where we take even more suffering. And then the Greek government went to EU and accepted an agreement that was even worse than the one they had to vote about. So the apathy in Greece is like, what? Even the people they voted for is letting them down. I mean, it's just horrendous. It's so evil. It's just all-encompassing evil.
But describe the central banking process. How does money actually get made? You say it's created as debt. So explain that process of money creation.
my short 101 on that one, because I'm not going to compete with all the brilliant economists out there who can explain it much better than me. But taking from Denmark, where there's an organization look into that, which is similar to Positive Money in the UK. It's basically 1/3 of the population believes that the central bank simply just makes the money, and then then old ladies save it and put it in the bank, and the bank is so kind and acting as an intermediary and lending it out. And then you have 2/3 of the population who realizes that actually there's something called fractional reserve banking, which is that the banks have figured out that maybe not all people need all the money all the time. So if you put in 100 kroner, we have kroner in Denmark, 100 kroner in the bank, the bank could lend out 1,000 kroner because not all the clients will get all the money all the time. But even those 2/3 of the Danish population still believes that that is the central bank that effectively is in charge of the money supply. But that is not the case at all. So what actually happens is if a person wants to borrow some money, for example, let's say $10,000. So a person he goes down to the bank and say, I would like to borrow $10,000, and then he writes a piece of paper. Whoever has this piece of paper, I own whoever has this piece of paper $10,000, and then this person signs this paper, and that then becomes an asset in the bank, and the bank takes that piece of paper and put that in on their asset side on their balance sheet, and then they issue digitally. They just print it in to the computer screen. A number 1 and 4 zeros, and that's it. Then they have just created the money just like that, out of thin air, and the money they put to this person's bank account of $10,000 becomes a liability of the bank. The bank agrees that it owes this person $10,000. So now the book is okay because you have 10,000. Your balance sheet is okay because you have 10,000 on your assets and you have 10,000 on your liability side. So everything is okay, and that means that as long as people are willing to borrow more money, then the money supply will grow. But when people pay back debt, then the money supply goes down. And when money supply is going down, then you have deflation and recession, and when money supply goes up, you have inflation and growth, or any combination of the two. Yeah, and that's another interesting little thing. You say we say that when we put money in the bank, we make a deposit, as if it's our money. Actually, we don't. We actually lend the bank our money. So the bank agrees to owe us some money. But we're not making a deposit. We've just given them our money and said, yeah, you can borrow my money, and it becomes their money basically, and they can do with whatever they want with that, and they can then, if they get, for example, get $1,000, if a person makes a deposit of $1,000, then the bank can actually go out and lend out another $9,000.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the fractional reserve banking process you're talking about, right? This ability to create more debt upon the assets created by people. So what, in terms of the conversations that you've had with these various people from the central banks, or people on the boards of the central banks, for example, in higher positions, what do you get about their sense of this system? They just think they just believe this is a natural system of, basically it's a parasite kind of mentality, because, as you say, everything is created in debt. There's no actual notion of credit. There's no notion that the United States system, for example, was supposed to have Congress issuing currency and coining currency. That was our constitutional right. And we've lost that notion of creating money as a credit that would ultimately produce things and goods for future and infrastructure for future productivity, for example. We now have a system that's very much predatory that almost just feeds on what's already created and feeds on people's creativity to pretty much enslave the entire planet in debt. They consider this just sort of a natural way of business?
Well, it's difficult to totally understand what they're doing. I mean, my favorite is possibly Ben Bernanke, because he was speaking about they called him Helicopter Ben, because he had the idea with if you ever had deflation, you could just take helicopters and fly over or do you say choppers in America? I don't know, but or helicopters, I don't know. But you could fly over the country and just throw out cash to the people. And that way you could then make inflation by increasing the money supply with cash. So but the way you chose to do it after the financial crisis in '08 and with the quantitative easing was to pretty much lend unlimited to the banks at zero interest, and then the banks would buy up bonds wherever they could get an interest, or maybe buy equity or real estate or wherever they could make some money out of it. And effectively, they might as well have just given the banks the money. I mean, it's the same thing. If you know that you can just borrow as much as you want for free and just keep buying and buy bonds and hold them to maturity, you know you're going to make the money. For example, there was the TARP, the Total Asset Relief Program in 2008 or 9, I believe it was, where I think it was Paulson who went to the Congress, said that they needed 780 billion. That money was borrowed at the Federal Reserve at 0% rates, pretty much, and was then used to buy Brazilian government bonds at 11%. So it was not used to improve anything inside the United States. So all the big investment banks, they bought Brazilian bonds at 11%. And obviously, if 5 big banks buys billions and billions of Brazilian real, which is their currency, then obviously that currency will go up against the dollar. So they also had a huge gain, I think, around in the region of 30% profit on the currency as well. So that was quite neat for them. And what I found out a year ago is that the Federal Reserve is privately owned. So it's owned by the 12 regional Federal Reserve banks, being New York Fed as the largest shareholder, and San Francisco Fed and Cleveland Fed and the other 9, I can't remember what they're called. And the owners of those 12 regional banks are the investment banks and some very wealthy private individuals through various trusts and, I don't know, number accounts and you name it, all different kind of shenanigans. And so basically, when Hank Paulson, who I don't know whether he was still at Goldman Sachs at the time, but certainly when the Federal Reserve paid 780 billion to the investment banks, it was pretty much a subsidiary, just issuing money to their owners and sending the bill to the U.S. taxpayer. It's just outrageous, you know. Yeah. You have the U.S. investment banks like Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, and Citibank. They own New York Fed, and the New York Fed owns Federal Reserve. Thank you very much. Give us 780 billion. Send the bill to the American people.
You talked about how, as you said, the Federal Reserve basically gave the money to the banks at 0% interest, right? That was supposed to be a bailout to the banks, and it was supposed to preserve the system. But really, the money never got back to the people themselves. It hasn't actually gone back to the middle class or the working class in any viable way.
No.
So people oftentimes, they talk about the system as though trickle-down economics is supposed to work that way, right? That the wealthy people are supposed to be out there purchasing cars and things like this, and that's going to then stimulate the economy. But it doesn't seem to work because the wealthiest are getting wealthier and they're investing. Where is their money going? Basically, where are they investing their money that it doesn't ultimately go back, for example, to the American worker, to purchase American goods, for example, the way that their model is supposed to work.
Yeah, I mean that neoconservative story. I mean, it hasn't worked ever anywhere in history. I don't think. I think it's crazy. But I mean, one of the reasons this is that the Western banking system, private loan banking system, has so many scams in it, and one of them is the simple one that if money is created as debt and it has to be paid back with interest, but if the interest has not been produced, then how are you going to pay it back? And it'll become like musical chairs where you are running around the table and there's not enough chairs, and whoever is strongest can push the weaker ones aside and sit down at the table. And that's exactly what's going on. So the only way you can pay back the money that you owe plus interest is if someone else is willing to make a loan and borrow that interest into existence, so you can pay it back. And that's why we see in the current economic system that debt seems to be growing in every single country. It just keeps growing and growing and growing. And so there's a recipe in there that if you know this, and if you're on the receiving end, you have this beauty of compound interest, and you can become very, very wealthy. Yeah. And how many cars do you need? I mean, how much money do you spend? I mean, it doesn't trickle down. I mean, it just doesn't. And we're seeing the middle class jobs are being, just eradicated. We have lost 600,000 middle class jobs just within banking in Europe since 2008, and it's a lot of different industries, one by one. And I know America, you guys have more than 50 million on food stamps, I hear, and here in Europe we have more and more people on various types of welfare systems, and we have a small elite that makes more money than they ever had, but the vast majority are getting poorer, and especially the middle class, they have a tough time. Yeah,
that's the hardest hit. Yeah.
Yeah.
But what is your sort of in assessing this situation and the model that you've worked within for a long time? What is your antidote to it? How would you obviously talked about how you saw times when the Federal Reserve was just acting, or not the federal, but any central bank or our central bank or your central bank was acting without any kind of sound economic policy in mind. It was just kind of trying to create a bubble, and then once the bubble exploded, they had to bail themselves out, basically, right? So how do we create a system that's actually more sustainable?
Yeah, I mean, Irving Fisher was talking about that back in the 1930s about having 100% reserve banking. And as you mentioned, issue money as credit, or as Abraham Lincoln did during the Civil War in the United States, and as Kennedy tried to do it for a few months in the 1960s. And that is in short the idea. I mean, there's on Iceland there's a proposal now to have a monetary reform where the government issues the money not as debt but as credit. It can be done in three ways, either as infrastructure projects or other public services, or it can be done by tax cuts, or it can be done by a citizen dividend, where the seigniorage, and seigniorage is the word for the value of producing money. So it could be, you can even call it a seigniorage dividend. So basically, if you issue money, you can pay it into each citizen's account. And in this particular case in Iceland, you would have two accounts. You would have an account of the central bank, the national bank, which is a government-owned national bank. And you get zero interest there, and then there wouldn't be a problem with too big to fail, because the banks would only be an intermediary, which is what most of the population anyway believe that they are. And so then you could have an investment account where you could invest in, where the banks could offer you, the clients, various investment products. And then you would take a risk. You could get an interest or return on this, but that would be up to you. And if the investment doesn't work out, then it would be an isolated case on a case-by-case basis, and most of the time you probably wouldn't lose all of it, even in the worst of cases. But if you were risk averse, you would just keep your money with the national bank, where the money would be safe. So that's in very short the idea in Iceland, to issue money, and the way you do it is that I don't know the numbers from Iceland. I can't remember on the top of my head, but I remember them from Denmark. For example, in Denmark we have 1,000 billion kroner issued as debt in the banks. So as they are being paid back, let's say for example they were paid back over 10 years, so that would be 100 billion kroner a year. So as that as that 100 billion kroner is paid back, obviously the money supply is going down, and when money supply goes down, then the society is more prone to recessions and deflation. So you have to keep money supply at the same level. So you would have to issue 100 billion kroner of money, that is state money, and that could be done as a citizen dividend, a dividend where the seniority is paid into each citizen's account. So that's quite a good idea, and I believe in such a situation where this citizen dividend is going into each citizen's account, you would have a lot more growth in the society than the current system, where when our money supply is going up with maybe 60 or to 100 billion kroner a year, 80% of that is going to speculation in financial assets, such as real estate most of the time. So basically the current system we have is benefiting the super rich who are able to speculate in real estate, and that is not benefiting the ordinary citizen at all. So this new system would create an immense growth in the society, because there'll be a multiplicator effect. If people get, if they get a few $100s a month in citizen dividend, people would be spending that money and, buying coffee, fixing your bike, maybe going to a physiotherapist or whatever you needed to do, and
you redeploy it into the economy. The point is that when people have purchasing power, they consume, and that's the old model. And the Ford model was, Ford paid his workers well because then they could afford to buy a car. I know someone told me, who lived in Detroit from the 50s and 60s, said that time period in America, you could buy a car every 2 years, and it's like you had the kind of purchasing power available to buy the new model car. And you didn't have to just wait for your to finish paying off your car or deal with your lease structure before buying a new one. It was a much more you had a lot more spending power just because of what you were making. Your income, your earning was higher at that time. So that's what you're getting at, right? Is that people need, if they have money to spend, they will spend it in the economy, and that then employs other people, and it raises the entire standard of living of the whole population.
Yeah. And in those days, you only needed one of the parents working, by the way, as well, right? Now we have to leave our kids in government-run institutions from their very, very early age to be able to afford to pay back the debt on the houses that we live in, or the flats we live in.
Exactly. So how are you going to work towards this goal? I'm just curious in terms of, do you have any projects in mind at the moment, now that you've stepped aside from the traditional corporate banking sector?
Well, I mean, first a lot of people get a shock when like I did. I mean, when they hear that the Denmark's national bank is actually a foreign-owned central bank controlled by other countries. So that's a huge shock, and that creates an immense amount of cognitive dissonance. So we have to get through all that. People have to accept that the world, what is up is down, and what is down is up. But in the short run, I'm helping a new political party with some ideas to this, the way the monetary system could work, and with some ideas on the economic policy. So at least I'm working on getting it out a little bit, and we'll see what happens. But it is very difficult, because there are some huge powers who has obviously if you can create money out of thin air and decide who gets rich, who gets to borrow what money, and if you can borrow money for free and invest in real estate when the market is going up, it's a no-brainer to make money. So obviously they're not so keen on this changing the system, and they can spend a lot of money. They own the media, the so-called free press. For example, my speech when I came out with these things, I'm an investment banker with 30 years experience. I've met a number of central bank governors, and I came out the 26th of January in a speech where I went through 3 or 4 different scams that the banking system is using to transfer wealth from the society to a super rich elite. We sent invitations out to 1,200 journalists in Denmark 3 times by email. Not a single one showed up. And they didn't write about it in the newspapers before, and they've been totally silent after.
Well,
so I guess
they're owned by the same. They're probably owned by the same banks or the banks owning corporations, and it's all kind of hand in glove at this point.
Yeah, it is. But I mean, at least they didn't come out and say I was wrong. So they have silently accepted that everything I said.
Sometimes it's worse when they ignore you, because then it's even harder to get the message out. If they start attacking you, actually it's easier to get more people listening to you.
Yeah.
The first thing they always try to do is ignore you first.
Yeah, they always do that. Yeah. We'll see how long that lasts. But
where can people find more of your information?
Well, at the moment we're still just building it up. But we have a web page called vorespenge.com. We're in the process of setting up. That's vorespenge.com. So it's all new, and we're a group of people who are planning to put some information on it there. But other than that, I think the idea is to go to your own political party and ask them, why do you accept privately owned central banking system? Look what they've done to the world. I mean, it's not even good. It's not even working. And then they say, oh, but if it's a national bank, then it's going to be like Zimbabwe. And that is rubbish. I mean, the United States have devalued the dollar with, I think, close to 95, 97% since 1913, when the Federal Reserve Act was passed. And Iceland, which is the country everybody's looking at now, and the media is trying to ignore, they've had an average growth in money supply since 1965 of 18% per year up till 2008. And so they've devalued with, I think, more than 99%.
But Mads, are you saying that the Icelandic currency is controlled by a central bank, a private central bank, or by the government itself as a credit?
No, it is still controlled, like all the other countries, by privately owned central bank, and the 3 largest banks are privately owned. Or at least they were up till the financial crisis, when they went bust. And I think, if I remember correctly, or I know correctly, that the Icelandic government have now taken over those banks temporarily and are going to privatize them again and give the proceeds to the people. But there is five out of the 6 political parties now, I believe, in Iceland. They want to change the system to a national bank, a state-owned national bank, issuing money as credit, not as debt. So it's quite interesting. And if that could spread, that could create huge growth for the world. We don't have to live like we do now, in perpetual debt, slavery, and with huge difference between rich and poor, which is only getting bigger and bigger.
But Mads, you mentioned that people should go and question their politicians about why we have a privately controlled central currency or central banking system. Have you asked these questions to politicians or to even central bank governors themselves?
Well, I wish I had more knowledge at the time, but I remember back in 2008, I was in London with 2 of my bosses, and through my connection in London, Hannah Scobie, who introduced me, Professor Hannah Scobie, who introduced me to a lot of central bank governors. We met with Sandra Pianaldo, who was Cleveland federal governor back in 2008, And at that time, I suggested, because the real estate market had gone up so much for years and years. So it's normal that sometimes you have a small setback. Certainly several examples of that through history. And so I suggested to her that the biggest concern should be privately owned homes. Because if you are a speculator and you have speculated through a company to buy 5, 10 houses, and you've made a lot of money on the real estate market going up from over maybe 15, 20 years, then when there is an eventual setback and you have the money in a company and so on, it's not too bad. But once people have to leave their private homes, you have all these social problems with divorces and people, a lot of huge consequences on an individual level. So I suggested to Sander Pianalto, why not come out with a program where the U.S. government would buy anybody who had economic problems, they would buy their houses for 80% of what they paid for it, and then allow them to stay in the house and pay maybe the equivalent of maybe 2% rent of the value of that house. Because everybody could afford that. If you had a house for $100,000, 2% of that, it's not too much money, right? It's only $2,000 a year. So you could survive that with maybe only one salary, and then you give the people an option of over 10 years to buy it back. And then she looked at me and she smiled and she said, "No, that was too complicated." And I was like, "Well, I thought it was a pretty good idea, but but then after that, Bear Stearns collapsed, the interbank market collapsed, the AIG collapsed. You had TARP and QE1, QE2, QE3, and so I think actually in hindsight it was actually quite good. That would work very well.
But you were looking to actually protect the homeowners and the people that were hurt the most, and they were looking to protect the banks and the speculation that they were playing, the games they were playing with the assets that they pooled from this real estate speculation, right? This mass market.
And that's why I think it was created with intent to get this quantitative easing, because if they had done this, then there would not have been a political pressure to bail out the banks, because everybody would still be living in the same houses. Nobody would have had a problem, and the losses would have been contained within the speculative part of the community. So you wouldn't have had these huge drops in certain places of the United States where real estate prices fell more than 50%, which is just outrageous.
Yeah. Mads, so you mentioned you have a website that people can go to and they can see other talks you've done, mostly in Danish, I know, but are you going to be doing more speaking in English and just sort of speaking engagements or activism in the near future?
Well, there are a couple of radio shows and whistleblowers who want to interview me. So that's what I'm doing now, and I hope to be writing a book about how a man could be investment banker for 30 years without understanding how money is created, and hopefully about how describe my life as a trader. Some of the experiences I've had, and then the awakening and the understanding of how really wrong this system is, and how it just creates a big disparity between rich and poor, and how wealthy this world really is if we just do it in a different way. I plan to write something about that. That's it. I mean, obviously, the mainstream media is not writing about me, and that's part of the reason is that I think it's so disgusting what they've done, the way they have been warmongering and supporting NATO aggression on innocent countries and the killings and all the refugees it has created. So the mainstream media, I feel they're horrible. I mean, they're really horrible. They have been rubber stamping all these atrocities, and I don't care if they want to talk to me. I want them to write about my speech, what I said in January. They can write about that, and if I like what they write, they can talk to me. Otherwise, I have nothing to say to them. They disgust me. Yeah.
Well, we appreciate you coming on this show and at least opening up with us. And I wish you good luck with the book and everything, all your endeavors that you're working on. I really look forward to hearing more of your story as it unfolds and you are able to tell it.
I appreciate the chance to come to your show, Sean. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mads.
Thank you.
Well, there you go, folks. Some great insights from a man who's lived the life, as he said, for 30 years in the business and finally waking up now, but better late than never. And hopefully he'll be using his insights and awareness to educate others who need to come out away from that system that we talked about, the debt slavery system, and to recognize, as Mas said, that the wealth of the world is all around us. It's not just predicated in the numbers and the fanciful, fantastic, magical valuations that are placed upon things by an economic system that buys and sells everything and everyone. The true wealth is in our everyday lives, in the spiritual realm, in the emotional realm, in our very existence, and what we can create when we're living here. This is Sean Stone signing off.